Hello! Welcome to tonight's live chat. The Word Nerds are now 8 years old. So,
third grade, baby.
This is 8 years for us. And so we thought it would be fun tonight to talk a little bit about how much has changed in the last 8 years in like the publishing industry and book world. Because it feels like a very different place from where it was when we started this channel. So I am extremely underprepared. Don't even have an opening question. I just have a list of things to talk about. But I guess we could kind of start by talking about like in like your memory, or I know we like looked at a little bit of this last week in the post chat, like what are things that you like remember, whether it's like book or trend or even like movie adaptations that was like really big in 2013 when we were starting? Does anyone have anything that like, oh, I remember this?
For clarification, before we start, the year of that was 2013.
Yes, that was when we started. Yes. Yeah. In case you can't do the math to figure out what was 8 years ago.
Yeah, you're here for the books, not the math.
I'm not here to insult the people watching us. I'm here to guide them.
I am.
Wow.
But yes,
2013 was the tail end of dystopian.
Yeah, I was gonna say where we were divergent at a time.
Yeah. 2013 was when Allegiant came out.
So
yeah, we were really wrapping up.
2013 we got like book 2 in Marie Lu's trilogy, book 2 in Tahira Mafi's trilogy. We got the third Delirium book.
So there were still, dystopian was still, I mean, going strong, I guess.
I don't know. I feel like
I don't think it was
trying to make
dystopian
go strong.
It wasn't selling, but it was.
Yes, it was things that
like those books.
Yeah, it was like series that had started during the strong years. Were like halfway through or towards the end. I don't think there was a lot of like big dystopian like first books that came out that year.
I remember being really had it impressed upon me for the first time how intense the backlash could be for a popular series that doesn't end the way the fans want it to. I very much remember that being
if we're talking about Allegiant, I don't think the issue was just that it didn't end the way people wanted it to.
Didn't end well, though, I think I said.
Yeah.
Didn't end well. So yeah, that was a turning point for me as an author, being like, oh, okay, don't screw this up. Got it. This is kind of terrifying. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting because I was in college. I was in like my last year of university, so I was student teaching, so I wasn't reading a lot of YA books like I did all throughout, growing up, because I just had so much that I had to do for school and for work. So like it was weird coming back into YA after college, because it was kind of a change from what I had read before, and some changes I liked, some changes I was like, oh, that's not my jam or whatever. But I thought it was interesting that like the like paranormal romance like trend had kind of like drifted off by then, and I was like, oh, okay, all right, we take a little break.
I remember feeling like getting involved in the writing community because I had just graduated college a few months earlier or something, and then I got really into reading, and I had already started picking up writing a little bit more and got really into studying craft because I was like, oh, I'm gonna get published, and it felt like everyone was getting published. Like so many book deals were being announced. It felt very like, oh, I'm just going to write a book. I'm going to hardcore revise it. And then in a year or two, I'll have a book deal.
It didn't feel unattainable. It felt very much like, because I remember Pitch Wars and stuff was big then as well, right? So
it was like just starting to get big.
Because I always track like Emmeline Black with when Word Nerds started, and then so maybe that was a couple years afterwards. Okay, yeah, but yeah, it definitely seemed like people were more easily getting agents. And series is one thing I will say. Series were still selling at that
trilogies were selling a lot.
I thought that had to be a series. I was like, oh, it's standalone series.
Yeah, and now it's like I would have to sell my soul to get one. So that is a big difference. Yeah.
was interesting that, like we're saying, like a lot of stuff was selling then, because I agree, like YA was like people were getting huge book deals at that point. But also kind of based on some of our like pre-chatting on this last week, I had written down under like, oh, like that was the like the beginning of the end for dystopian. Like I think it was also sort of the beginning of YA's decline too. But it was like so far in the beginning that like a lot of stuff was getting huge book deals, but I think those were a lot of books that like didn't earn out their advances and authors didn't get second
publishing
deal.
was hoping for like, because we did Harry Potter, we did Twilight, we did Hunger Games, we did Divergent, and it was always a little less successful, so they were just waiting for that next thing.
They were,
and it never showed up.
The next Harry Potter, which I don't think is possible. But like, did we have another big one after the end of Divergent, or did that never?
I don't even count Divergent.
Fault in Our Stars, The Hate You Give.
Okay, no, I mean like. Okay, yeah, Hate You Give was along those lines, but I was thinking like my brain always goes straight to fantasy and science fiction. That's where I live. But I'm thinking like big movie franchise type thing. Like Twilight.
Like in my head, it's Harry Potter, Twilight, Hunger Games of like
like worldwide phenomena.
Worldwide phenomena is where, because like if I go up to someone on the street and say Twilight, they're like, yeah, what about it? Whereas if I went up and said Hate You Give, most random non-book reading people aren't gonna know what that is.
I don't know. I feel like
it's in a lot of school lists.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
but like because it wasn't a series, it didn't like
exactly
affect publishing in the long
When I say I write YA, they don't ask me, oh, like The Hate You Give. No, it's like
Twilight.
Oh, like Twilight. Oh, like Hunger Games. Yeah.
I wonder if more teenagers might though.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah.
I think it's just kind of like an issue of contemporary books that it is harder for contemporary, even the ones that are really, really successful. Like The Hate was extremely successful. Like it was number one on the New York Times bestseller list longer than The Hunger Games was. I'm pretty sure.
It's still there.
It's crazy. But it when it's not a series,
it's not
doesn't always. Like that, like cultural consciousness of it is different. It's not that it's like less or better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah. I don't think it has the same amount of time to build up.
That makes a huge difference too when it's not the story. The people like loved it. Were like, oh, it's amazing, but it also wasn't. They're like, oh, this is my comfort read that I like read over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. Or comfort watch. Just watch the same Harry Potter movie.
Also about
I read The Fault in Our Stars just to feel good.
I think at least my life isn't this bad.
And I'm interested too because like the perception on our part was that was the case, but also we were very fresh-faced, and I'm sure people who were around then would be like, oh yeah, stuff was selling, but it was still really hard. But yeah.
Well, I think it's also interesting with like different social media and its influence on the book community, like compared to like in 2013, like especially like TikTok now, and Book Talk and everything. I think that has like had an impact on books and like how people interact with them as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like when I'm pretty sure 2013 or 2014 was when I started book blogging. So it would have been the year or the year after I got out of high school. So I'm thinking like, how did I get
that, like,
at that
blogs
point?
were a bigger thing
Yeah,
back then.
right?
Blog tours.
Yeah.
I started on a blog.
And
Well,
for
I'm trying to
writers,
think,
it's like you have to have a blog if you're a writer, really.
Yeah.
Like, how did I get my book? I feel like I went into a physical bookstore and that was how I got my book recommendations, because I just bought what looked cool. Like I wasn't really looking stuff up on the internet, or I was reading book blogs. I guess I was sort of on YouTube because that was kind of the time where there was a couple of bigger book bloggers that were like getting their start.
It was actually one of the things. Like, we made this channel
because we started
already.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like
it's actually one of the things I wrote down.
Pull and Bananas books, like they were kind of the big two that started it. But I didn't know a lot of like small book bloggers or anything. It was only the big ones.
So one of the things I wrote down for like looking back at like 2013 is BookTube and Epic Reads. Epic Reads was huge back then.
Yes.
to the point where I was always
love them.
frustrated. I loved them, but I was also really frustrated by like the general public's response to them, because it was all people being like, "Oh my gosh, they're amazing! They give the best book recommendations," and people treated them like they were just some like booktubers. And I was like, "No, they work for a publisher."
Yeah.
They're trying to sell you things.
Yeah, and people acted like they were just these like people who love books giving recommendations, and they love books, yes, and they were giving recommendations. They also worked for a publishing company, and it was just like the hold that HarperCollins had over all of us.
Oh my god!
Oh,
I
yeah.
forgot about how much they controlled our lives.
It was like, yeah, it was like anything that came out with Harper Teen. It was like, oh, I have to read this.
It was like also really a golden age for writing advice on blogs. You could find writing advice from anyone and everyone on a blog on the internet.
Which also meant all of it good.
I think
Absolutely not. I was giving writing advice on a blog 8 years ago, and I should not have been.
I think we talked about this a little bit last, like in preparation for this, but the writing advice of like that was when the like hard and fast, these are the rules that you need to follow, where like those kind of blog posts are really big, where it wasn't just like, oh, do what works for you. It's like, you have to do this thing to be a writer. And that was, oh man.
And there was such a strong sentiment that if you wanted to be a writer, you needed to put a social media presence out there. But it's like, we're writers, we're not online personalities. And so we're like, well, what are we going to talk about? I guess what we're learning with writing. And like everyone was doing that.
Yeah. And yeah, I think there was like so many publishers thought that was how they were going to sell books, was authors who like the author was popular, like selling yourself. And I think they realized since then, like, there were multiple authors that they like gave book deals to because like they had a decent book, like they had a good book, and they had a huge social media following, and like their books didn't sell well. So I think that lesson's kind of been learned. That isn't always like, sometimes it is like, sometimes someone who's really popular online will also do well with their books, but it isn't always connected. Especially with the TikTok algorithm now, which is like one of the big game changers in the recent past few years, is that like TikTok has actually started moving some publishing numbers, which a lot of social media has not in the past.
Oh yeah, I feel like half the time now, like if I see one of my book talk friends be like, I just finished reading this book and it was really great, I'm like, okay, add it to the cart. Or like if it was like an author being like, I have a Kindle book and it's 99 cents, I'd be like, okay, why not? Like, I'll just go and check it out. So like, yeah, I feel in that way, it's like so much easier to promote yourself on there. And if the algorithm picks up one video, like, you're set.
Let us know. Give us a shout in the discussion section if you're here. How long have you been watching the Word Nerds? I know there's like so many names that I recognize from a very long time ago, but I can never remember, like, have any of you actually been here the whole time? Like, I'm so sorry if you have been, but
I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Well, like, I have,
but I do want to know.
Still don't know anything, but now I know I don't know anything.
And I have 8 years of experience to back it up.
I know more than I did 8 years ago, and I give less writing advice.
I know more than I did 8 years ago, but I'm more aware of like what I don't know, or like what isn't hard and fast. I like that Rachel brought up like a lot of writing advice, like in 2013 was like very like black and white, like this is the right way to do things and this is the wrong way to do things.
Yeah.
Like I remember that was like kind of when it was like really big to be like, and this is true in a way, but also I think like it got like said so black and white that it got misinterpreted, but like everything was like, you have to start your book in the action. And then it was like, oh, I have to like start this in like a chase scene, you know?
And I feel like the first line, like everyone's going to judge you on that first line. Make sure you have a really good first line and first paragraph, because people are going to put your book down if they don't like the first page. Like I remember that being like so stressed.
I think that like the more, and maybe this is true for everyone, which is why it's gotten less like do this, not that. Like the more I get older and more experienced in the writing world, the more I realize the advice I give is very like depends on A, B, or C, you know. It's not, I'm never ever going to say like you need to do this. you know, because it's going to be different for everyone. So, yeah.
There's a couple mentions in the comments about Nano. Was NaNoWriMo a thing in 2013? Did any of y'all do it?
Yeah. Kelly's been doing Nano a super long time.
Like 15 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But I do feel like
out of touch.
It was getting really big around that time. And it's probably connected to the fact that like books were getting big advances. It felt like anybody could get a book deal. And I feel like that may have been part of the reason that like Nano was really starting.
Or just people falling in love with books as they fell in love with Twilight.
Yeah, I found NaNoWriMo in 2012 because I Googled like how to write a book, and NaNoWriMo came up.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it was like
a couple people in the
everything. I think my like internet's really laggy because like everyone is like robots for me. But yeah, I think it was like very like writing felt like accessible, and yeah, like people were getting excited about books and reading. I know that was it for me. Like I had just finished college, or I was just finishing college, and I had read like a little bit off and on during the years. Like I'd read The Hunger Games and stuff, but I was like getting back into reading, and there were these books that I was like, oh, like I could like, write books like this. This is fun. It doesn't feel like some like huge literary thing that I would never be smart enough to write or something, you know? So, yeah, I think that's.
Could we say maybe that's the time that books and writing became a little bit more accessible?
Where it started to. I think YA has still to this day has accessibility and diversity problems with expanding. But it did feel a little bit back then like, oh, like this is where the young women authors are starting to write books. Like,
I think something else I wanted to bring up was.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's a fully new topic, so go ahead and.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead anyways.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that like when I was growing up and I was reading books, like I knew what an author was, like the concept of an author, but like the idea that I could be one was just like did not connect until like college.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I was still thinking like, well, there's no way you could get traditionally published. Like you have to go like the self-publishing route. And like, as I obviously learned more about the publishing industry, it was a little less intimidating, but I think it's interesting that I grew up like so separated from like authors versus like now where you can have more access to them. Does that make sense?
I also think around that time, like Veronica Roth was a big deal because she was so young. It was like, oh,
she was young, and she was doing writing advice on a blog, on multiple blogs.
Like, oh, people around my age can like publish books.
Although kind of interesting, because I'm looking at like Goodreads Choice Awards for 2013, and like last week we talked a little bit about what the big books were and stuff. But just looking at like reading some different names and seeing like these were the big voices in YA back then, and like whose careers have lasted to now. Like I feel because when we mentioned Beth Revis, I started thinking of like, oh, has she done anything recently, or like is she still?
Yeah, she's got stuff coming out.
I feel like I haven't heard about her in a while.
No, like because like some of these people I know they've published books. Like Gail Forman was one. I'm like, oh, I think she has something recently, and I loved her books at the time, but they're not people I'm following like I was back then.
Yeah,
so
Beth is doing right now. She's publishing through that like experimental Amazon like serial publishing where you publish tiny chunks at a time and then like readers can vote and stuff. I don't know everything about it, but it looked very cool. She is always, I feel like, at the front of experimental things in publishing.
Yeah.
So is she still getting any traditional deals, or is she mostly self-publishing?
I think she had something with like dark in the title, which I know is like a really common word in a lot of YA, but
she had like in the Ravenous Dark or something.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
I'm pulling up her Goodreads.
I don't think the Ravenous Dark is Beth Revis. I think that's somebody else.
It's Give the Dark My Love. That's what I'm thinking of.
Oh, there we go. I mean, love the title.
I hadn't heard of it, but it sounds cool.
And that one just had a sequel that came out a couple years ago.
What? A sequel?
Yeah, I remember Give the Dark My Love. Yeah, a while back. I remember when that came out.
What else? Who else is on that list, Kelly?
Okay, so Rochelle Mead was another one that jumped out because we've been talking Vampire Diaries, Vampire Academy a lot recently. Because I think she had that like when we went to
the
Y'all
Glittering
Fest.
Court one was
that one.
Oh yes,
I don't know anyone who's read it, but I know multiple books came out in that series.
So
Yeah,
people
same.
must have read it.
Yeah, Lauren Oliver.
I love Lauren Oliver. Oh my god.
See, I'm waiting for her to be like, oh, they're still writing things, and you're just not aware of them.
I think
Veronica
she is
Rossi.
still writing things.
Yeah, I remember she wrote those books that were like you could read it in either direction. That was Lauren
That was a
Oliver.
while
It
ago
was
too,
like-
though.
Interesting.
That was
it was
a couple
probably, like,
years ago.
Well, she ran
4
that
years
publishing house that did a bunch of really awful stuff.
Oh, really?
Oh, Paper
Oh.
Lantern Lit. Was that the name of it?
That book packaging thing.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oof.
True,
Big
real life
oof.
history.
The Pittacus lore books, the like, I forget what the first one was.
Oh, those were
Yeah.
book packaging books.
Another person who has done a shady book packaging company.
Yeah,
2013, man.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think because publishing was getting so big, you did start getting like companies coming in being like, oh, well, I'll do this thing and then I'll make a bunch of money, but you'll write the book.
I did that for like a one-time deal.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
At one point.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I remember that.
it did not go anywhere, but I still got paid for it. So
And I'm saying that there are like, legitimate book packagers.
Oh, yeah,
that,
for
like,
sure.
as well.
Yeah.
There's been a couple shady
Yeah.
ones.
yeah,
And like some of them, like Tahara Mafi, like I know they're still doing stuff, but like it was never what that peak was.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
being successful
Oh, didn't
during that
Tahoe's
YA
new book
peak.
just get put on NetGalley, I believe?
Oh.
It's like a new fantasy.
Holly Black has had a resurgence. Like I remember
has,
reading her
right.
books when I was 15, and now she's back again with pretty
I don't
popular.
think she ever really goes away. She's got like a very
That's true.
loyal.
I think
fan
she had like
base.
a kind of a cult following.
Yeah,
Yeah, she kind of had like a cult following where she wasn't like super well known, but like people, like some people, like really liked her stuff. And then Cruel Prince came out, and then it was just like pew. Which I'm happy about. Give me all the fairy books.
yeah.
Um,
She's
Cassandra Clare is still
one of the
writing.
most popular ones.
Yeah, there you
Oh
go.
yeah, look, there are some like
We
Yeah.
talked a lot about
Hardcore.
Cassandra Clare in the old publishing
Yeah.
videos.
Well, and, like,
Yeah.
the Goodreads Choice Award winner for middle grade was, of course, a Rick Riordan book, which, like, it's still a Rick Riordan
yeah.
every year. Like, he wins
Oh,
the
yeah,
middle
yeah.
grade category
Yeah.
of Goodreads every year.
Well, that's actually kind of cool though to look back and be like, oh, that was probably, you know, part of the first or second series of his, and now he has this like little mythology empire in middle grade, and like has all these other authors like writing their own mythologies and like multicultural,
Yeah,
like
that's
everything.
very
So
cool.
that's really cool.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted
Did
to
he
talk
like do a
about.
more successful book packaging company? And because he just
No, he has an
No,
imprint
it's an
of a
actual publishing.
No,
imprint.
no, yeah.
Yeah, he has an imprint.
He actually gives people book deals under their own names and pays
Yeah, it's
them
Rick Riordan
properly.
Presents.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah,
Uh,
it's different.
It's like through Disney Hyperion, his publisher.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up because like Megan mentioned how like even though it felt super accessible at the time, like it wasn't accessible still for a lot of different types of writers. And we did like one of our first comments was I love seeing black and non-black people on covers. Daniel Clayton's Dystopian was my first time seeing it. And I think that's like one thing that has changed a ton because when we were kind of like prepping for this, I looked it up, and 2014 was when We Need Diverse Books was founded, like the nonprofit. So like 2013 was when that conversation was kind of starting. And even though like there's still so much work that needs to be done in that arena, I think that has made a huge effect on the industry in a lot of good ways, also some bad ways. Because I do think between then and now, there was definitely, because there was like, 2013, 2014, everyone was like, oh, we need diverse books. We're going to talk about this. And then like 2 years later, suddenly it was like, here's a bunch of books by white people with characters of color.
Well, I'm trying to think of like the
Yeah.
first book cover I saw that had a black woman on it was a YA, and like
It was
really?
there was like drama with it because it was a white author, Jody Meadows.
think-
Yeah.
yes,
It wasn't
that's
it wasn't the first
It
YA
was-
book with a black character
It
on
was
the
a
cover.
ball
It was the-
gown.
But it was
it was the
Oh,
first like black girl in a dress on a cover,
which was very popular back then.
Oh,
the ball
yeah.
gown
The ball
covers.
gown on the cover. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Although
so
around
like
the time-
specifically YA. Okay.
Mhm.
Around
Yeah.
the time that book, I don't remember what it was called, but it was, I remember it was Jody Meadows.
Before
like
She
when that
Ignites.
like cover, when that cover was like announced and everything, and it was like, oh, like a black girl in a ball gown, and that hasn't happened before. Like the ball gown covers were like going out of style at the time, which is what always happens with books by or about characters of color is it's like right when this is dying out, we're gonna finally let you guys do it.
We're gonna do it and then be like, oh, no one likes it. Like,
yeah.
Weird,
Yeah,
it
but I
didn't sell.
Yeah.
Huh.
Man, ball gown covers. They had a grip on us.
Yeah, Kira Cass was another one I was going to mention of like,
Yes.
she was
yes.
a
Oh,
big
yeah.
deal then.
I read that whole series in 2 days, that Kira Cass.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Well, like this is also kind of
Yeah.
an interesting thing of like there were authors of color writing white people because I specifically remember, and I still like have a gripe with this series so badly. The Iron Fae by Julie Kagawa, because I remember reading that book series, and it's about a white girl named Megan, and
What
and
up?
It's about me.
I still remember even at the time being like, this is a Japanese author. Why is her main character white?
I mean, there's nothing wrong with an author.
There's definitely nothing wrong with that.
Like, yeah, there's
No.
there's a lot less there, but if it was like a white author writing a Japanese character, like absolutely that is not equal. But even me thinking like at the time being like, why couldn't she write a Japanese character? That would have been so much more interesting.
She might
than-
not have been able
Yeah,
to.
exactly.
Yeah,
at
but exactly.
the
It's because
time.
that like at the time was not okay. But it's like,
Yeah.
you know, and the Kira Cass is not white. I do not
Yeah.
isn't she
No, she's
South
not white.
American?
I don't
I'm
know.
like, I don't remember exactly which country she comes from. But,
But it
yeah,
was
her main
definitely-
character is a white girl. So
A
you're
lot
like,
of the
okay.
authors of color who were getting published back then, a lot of them were writing white characters because that's all they were
For a
allowed.
very
Yeah.
good reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Kira Cass came out when, like, we need diverse books had not taken off. You know, like, people were still like, we can't connect to this character because they're brown. You know, like,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
was
it's
probably
like-
not an
I think-
option if you wanted to get published.
Yeah, like the only YA books that were like by like Black authors and had Black characters were always like urban fiction.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with those, but it's all that
Or
was
the
allowed.
side
Kira Cass is
character.
Puerto Rican.
Puerto
There
Rican,
you
thank
go.
you.
Her
Yeah.
dad
And
is
if
Puerto Rican.
if she wanted to get shelved in the urban section, that's what she would do. But she wants to get shelved under mainstream fantasy, so she sells
Exactly.
to.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
or all of the people of color were side characters who got killed off very fast.
Yeah.
Which like still kind of happens today. Oof. But not as much as back then.
Yeah, and I can't completely speak to everything that was going on and why every author wrote a story the way that they did, but we do know that like that was a huge problem with like just not opening the door for other stories, and doors are opening more, but it's like it's a sliver. And
I can't remember who it is that publishes the information, but like they put out statistics about like how much of publishing in like children's books specifically has authors of color or characters of color in them, and like I think consistently there are more animal characters in children's books than people of color, and it's just you think it's going to get better each year, and it doesn't.
In my last job, we talked about those statistics a lot when we did presentations. We were doing a project that involved diverse children's books, and like one of the things that like we noticed about those numbers and we would bring up in our presentations is that like in the most recent numbers, the number of white main characters went down, but like all of the characters of color like barely changed, and it was the animal number that went up. Like they were like, oh, people don't want children's books about like white kids. We're gonna just get about bears. Like, what?
Oh my god.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I do wonder if the main issue with that is because there is a culture of we as white authors do not want to take the place of say a Black author writing a Black main character, right? So we don't do that.
But then publishers still don't buy books.
But then publishers are not publishing enough, authors of color to fill those gaps that we're now filling with bears, I guess.
and a lot of white people still.
And a lot of white people
Yeah.
still, yeah. So, if you don't fix the root of the problem, you're not going to have more characters that aren't just white or bears and dogs or whatever.
Yeah.
I
there were
looked up
definitely-
the company I think that puts out those studies is called Lee and Low.
Thank you.
Definitely recommend checking those out if you haven't.
I think Leanne Lowe does the publishing industry numbers about who works in publishing. The one about children's books, it's a university that does it, and I can't think of their name right now. I think it's in like Wisconsin or something, or Michigan, one of those northern states. Somewhere near Leah. I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's like the Center for Collaborative Children. I can't remember the name of it, but I can find it.
So now I'm looking at the adult titles on Goodreads, because like when we started the channel, we were definitely very focused on YA, but I think over the years we've kind of broadened a little bit. But just looking at kind of like, I didn't realize Vicious came out in 2013. I felt like that was newer.
Yeah, I felt it was like at least 2015 or something. Wow.
But looking at it now, like there's some authors I recognize, but even in adult fantasy, I feel like things have skewed more towards women than it was back then. There's still like, it's almost 50-50, but I feel like some of the like YA readers and authors have kind of graduated into adult along the same time a lot of the word nerds did.
This is something we've talked a lot about. Oh, go ahead, Emma.
And I figure it's the Cooperative Children's Book Center, and it's at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So they're the ones who do the children's numbers.
Yeah, this is something we talked a lot about in lots of different post chats and Slack chats and stuff, talking about how the millennial voice has affected YA and how that has possibly affected like what YA is selling now. Even though a lot of like the readership who made YA big are now adults, sometimes it feels like the highest ups in publishing are still trying to make stuff that like our readership would want to read, when it's like, no, we're adults now. Like you should be targeting the teens.
Yeah,
even though adults can and do read YA. Like
very quickly, like jump back to the diversity discussion before we move on to this part, because I think this is really interesting too. But Penumbra Mine had like a really great point that I was going to mention, is that like it went from like authors of color, if they were getting published, like could only write white characters, to like publishing like way overcorrected in the wrong direction. Because Penumbra Mine said non-white authors are getting rejected for not writing ethnicity tropes for their own race. Not all Native American authors are going to write like reservation dogs. Not all Black authors are going to write growing up in the ghettos, among the gangs, or in the racist South, and Hispanic authors aren't all going to write about growing up with their abuela and living in fear of INS. And yeah, that's like such a great point, that it's like gone from like, you can only write white characters to like, you can only write, if you're a Black author, you have to write Black characters, and you have to write about racism, and you have to do this. So
or we already have one of this. So
Very much.
Yeah, I've seen a number of authors talk about how they only want to write and like focus on like Black joy. Like they're like, I get that there should be, you know, a place for people who want to read books about racism and everything like that, but they're like, for me, this is what I want. So it's like another instance where we just need a large array of books.
And there were people who like got upset that Aiden Thomas's second book didn't have a trans character in it. You know, and it's like, no, like he's allowed to write cis characters if he wants to.
I just picked up that book from the library.
This is the thing that I run into too. Like, I'm very excited and happy that publishers are starting to pick up like books when I write them and they have bisexual characters in them. Like, that's very exciting. But like, so far, all of my main characters have ended up with the same sex. But I'm like, as a bisexual author, I'm going to want to write both of those things happening. But I'm like, does at one point writing that get me dumped on, essentially? Right? Like, oh no, you're not getting persecuted for holding hands in public, so this isn't really a bisexual book or whatever, you know, like
you're very least going to get readers who are like upset, but are like, oh, how dare you put a girl and a boy together? This isn't really bisexual.
I have literally had people come at me on TikTok when I was talking about Witches, Fashion, and Ruin, who hadn't even read the book, that assumed I had done that. And I was like, well, A, I didn't, and B, if I did, it should be fine. Because
it would still be valid, because that's what bisexuality is.
Like, it's not quite the same, but yeah, I mean, like, you shouldn't be telling somebody who is that identity, like, you're doing that identity wrong. because like
or like there's not enough of it in your book.
Because like authors of color are getting that now, like with the culture that's been created on Twitter. I get really frustrated seeing like Muslim authors being called out on TikTok by white girls, and it's like, what are you doing? Just because you could use all of the call out language and you've heard somebody else say this about this Muslim author doesn't mean it's your place to go off on TikTok on this author and say that she's not writing being Muslim correctly.
I think that's a thing that I think that is definitely a thing that we've kind of seen the arc of over the last 8 years is like, at first, you know, these conversations were starting online. It was great. And then kind of like the language that was being used to have important conversations did start getting co-opted by people who were misusing it. And because of that, we've seen a lot of authors just step away from social media, which is great for them, and they absolutely should. But it kind of sucks as well, because it's like, well, now there's less conversations being had there, but are we having them elsewhere? And how do we bring those conversations elsewhere? It's a very large conversation.
Yeah. How do we bring them somewhere that is productive
that is productive and safe for the authors to have those conversations?
Yeah, I think like initially it was on Goodreads, right? Or wherever you reviewed a book, you said, I had this problem with it, or I didn't think that this was done well enough, or this was offensive. And it was a review, and you talked to fellow reviewers about it, and you didn't go directly to the author and tell them they were a terrible person. You know, like I don't know. And then I assume that authors talk to each other and said like, hey, I read this and maybe this is an issue. Or they read the reviews. I don't know. So,
and it's complicated too, because like there are some authors who do need to be called out and do need to be canceled.
It's difficult.
I feel like all of the major scandals or call-outs or what have you, I don't remember them happening that far back. Like I feel like the one I'm thinking about
to remember.
Right. Well, I'm thinking about like some of the big ones that like I remember were like 2017 or like that kind of thing. So it definitely was, it was like just starting, but I don't think anything like huge happened at that point, other than maybe people being mad about how Allegiant ended, you know?
Because I mean, 2013, like speaking of Goodreads Choice Awards, 2013 was when Eleanor and Park came out, and like I know that there were people, especially Asian people, talking about how harmful that book was at the time, but I heard none of it. Like
I didn't hear about. I think I read that book and was like, oh, this was fine. But like, it kind of went over my head. And then I don't think I learned about it until like 2016 or 17 when people were like, actually, this book has some problems. And I was like, oh, really? Like, I've never heard about this before.
Yeah.
Then again, that's also probably like growth of the internet.
Yeah. I think that's one would hope a good example of what was, I don't know. I wasn't involved in the thick of it, but that felt productive and educational.
That is productive and educational, but were there any consequences?
No, I would hope that the author would have taken note of that. And no, I don't know. I don't know the reaction would hopefully let's do better in the future thing, but who knows? I don't know. Like I said, I didn't pay attention to the reaction to that, so maybe no.
I will say, like on the whole, I know we have like a long ways to go with diversity, but I think we have seen so much more representation now compared to like when I was a teen. Because I was trying to think what was the first book that I read that had a queer character in it, and I think it was Valiant by Holly Claire, and it was like not Holly Claire, wow, Holly Black. And the character was a side character. And so like it wasn't until Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda that I read a POV character who was queer. And like for a lot of people of color or different religions, their moment of like, hey, here's the one book that's been published that has some aspect of my identity in it. So like obviously more to go, but I think that's a positive that has happened within the last 8 years.
Yeah, there's a good comment from N. Griswold kind of in that vein, who said, my grandmother always made sure my sister and I had books with people like us, and I can't even imagine how much work she put into finding those books. My love of reading came from her, and I didn't know that was a big deal then, but I appreciate her for it now.
Aww, that's awesome. Go grandma.
Yeah.
Okay, kind of a side note that's changing the topic, but back to the actual main topic. So when I was looking at which authors were in the Goodreads Choice Awards and why, I was kind of looking at like longevity. If you were one of the big books of that year, about what percentage maintained a career, but then looking at paranormal fantasy, so adult. I would call most of these urban fantasy, but honestly, the list has stayed exactly the same. Like maybe there's one or two that have kind of like trailed off, but all of these authors are still writing the same series 8 years later.
Wow.
Like, that industry has not changed at all. So,
Versus YA? Did you say the YA?
Adult paranormal fantasy, so urban fantasy adult.
Okay, but did you look at the YA and the YA has dropped off significantly more than
I would
the
say
adult?
it's like a 50-50. Like it's definitely not like this list where there's like two names that I didn't know off the top of my head from like working at a bookstore or whatever. And like one of them, maybe it stopped publishing. Another one I just am not aware of, but she still has a book coming out this year.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
the only one like I know isn't writing that industry anymore is Rochelle Mead, who tried an urban fantasy series and it failed.
Okay.
And I would say like in YA fantasy, like most of these people, because I'm looking at it now, most of these people are still writing and publishing. Some of them are still really big, and some of them are like they're still writing, but like like we talked about Lauren Oliver, like she's not super big anymore. But like Lee Bardugo's on here. Siege and Storm came out in 2013.
Well, Lee Bardugo is
that came out in 2013.
I was thinking of authors like Lord DeStefano, who just announced that she's publishing. She dropped out of into nowhere for a really long time for me. I don't keep as updated as I should either. Like I need to be more on social media to pay attention. But she just announced she's doing an adult now. It sounds like almost like leaning towards horror, maybe. So yeah, I found that really interesting. A lot of authors that were YA originally seem to be going into either middle grade or adult. So
and I think even just the staying on top of what's coming out is something that's changed, because I feel like in 2013 we were all aware of exactly what books were coming. And now it's just, I don't know if, like Rachel probably is more than the rest of us, but if because we've lost interest, or I just don't feel like everyone's on the same page with these are my most anticipated books anymore. And like, we're not tracking it the same way. I'm like waiting for other people to read stuff and tell me it's good, rather than being like, I'm going to pick these all up as soon as they come out.
Agreed.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm trying to think of like somebody who is like, I'm pretty on Book Talk a lot. And I'm like, I feel like the books that are really big consistently on TikTok have already come out like a couple years ago. Like everybody recommends books that have already come out in the last couple of years. There's not, and I like, there's a lot of like book hauls or like little quick reviews of like, this one just came out. But for the most part, everyone always does like, book recommendations. And they're like, Throne of Glass, Cruel Prince, like old, like Sabbath to Hear, like all these kind of like older ones. So sometimes people will do like more up to date ones, but
well, there definitely are some books that I'm like, why is this like keep getting recommended on TikTok? Like, it's actually one thing I kind of appreciate about Book Talk is that it isn't so focused on like, this is a book that came out this month, and it's because it's not accessible to everybody to get like the books that are just now coming out, and so like I appreciate that there's a lot more like people just kind of, they're just talking about books they like, and they'll talk about like, books that made me cry or books that did this, and they don't just restrict themselves to stuff that came out this year, that people share.
There's like there's this really huge like consumerism chat about BookTube like when we were starting and stuff, because like the algorithm was favoring people talking about stuff that had been out a week. Like if you could get a video out within a week of a book coming out, it would do really, really well. And it still would do really well. But it's like, are people going to find it and buy it off of that? Like, what is the benefit to being the first person there?
And I think in YA specifically, when I think back to like when I was reading as a teen, I was using the library. I wasn't buying books. Like if I bought a book, it was because I had read it several times and I knew I wanted to reread it.
Same.
But like,
I would never buy a book unless I had already read it. And how the times have changed. But like,
yes, for sure. But so like when I was a teen, I wasn't looking for like, when was this published? Did this just come out? I was just browsing the shelves, and if it sounded interesting, I checked it out. Like I was reading Tamora Pierce like 10 years after it had come out. You know, so like I think that aspect is similar to what you're seeing on TikTok.
Yeah. And while I appreciate like some build up and I appreciate like some build up and anticipation for books that are coming out and stuff, but it also can be really frustrating as a reader when like you're just seeing like tons of booktube videos or tweets or whatever about like a book and you're like, oh, this sounds so good, and it doesn't come out for like 5 more months. You know, and it's like, oh, I can't read that right now. I'm going to forget about it by the time it does come out, you know? So,
and I tend to be a lot less trusting of that. Like it's hype. It's not, a lot of these people have been like offered it from the publisher. And if they don't love it, they're going to get less books from the publisher and just.
Not just that. People are often paid now, particularly on YouTube. Like
and I also think like it affects your review in a way when like you know you got to read it early, you know, you're like, ooh, I have to be one of the first people to read this, and that makes me like it a little bit more sometimes.
Yeah. I try and put in my, like, if I review something, whether I got it sent for me for free or like I was paid to talk about it or whatever, even if like I didn't really like it, I'll definitely be like, well, this like wasn't for me, or I won't even say it wasn't for me. I'll just be like, hey, if you like this, you're gonna like it. Or like if you're looking for something that has X, Y, and Z, like maybe pick this up. But that's also smart. Like a very subjective thing of like, not everything that I like you're gonna like, and not everything that you like I'm gonna like. So like whatever.
There are also different laws now regarding how much you have to disclose when someone has paid you to talk about something.
And I'm also not super familiar with that because like I'm not getting 5-figure book deals to talk about stuff, and like I'm not getting brand deals left, right, and center. But like, yeah, you have to disclose it. I know there are different. I'm
wondering, do we have the same laws that they do?
Where?
Like Canada and the US, like just like the US made laws, and then everyone just assumes that I don't know. But
I assume that companies have to obey the laws, and if the company is US based, then maybe.
Well, but it's also just good manners.
Yes.
Friend of mine had a good point. Since 2020, when so many books and movies were delayed by the pandemic, I stopped paying attention to like what's the book.
Yeah, that's definitely gonna influence it.
And
I
Griswold
also
had
think
a
it's
good
like
question. You can finish. This is a different topic.
Okay, sure. I don't know how this was in 2013 because like I did not read ebooks until like a year ago. So I especially see this on TikTok though, where like ebooks are really big, which is great because going back to our talk on consumerism, you know, it's so much easier and fairly cheaper to read on your iPad or like on Kindle or on Kobo or whatever than it is to like buy physical copies of things. So I feel like that has grown a lot as well, especially like getting published on Amazon or even just like library halls or like kind of are bigger now than they were, and like ebooks are bigger than they were. So I do appreciate that. And like consumerism is more in and audiobooks. Yes, audiobooks have come so far. So like that's a bigger conversation on it, and I like that.
Ingrid's had a good question. Can you think of any book series that were left incomplete? I've been wondering if that's the reason Aquarius with the series potential.
I can think of one, V.E. Schwab's archived trilogy. She never got the third book. People still ask where it is, and it's not.
Oh, that's fun. That must drive her nuts. Mine is Witches of Afternoon is supposed to have a sequel. It's technically a standalone with series potential, which is the thing they love to tell you to query things as. But I definitely had a book 2 and 3 planned, and the publisher knows that. But it came out literally a week before all of the bookstores started closing because of the pandemic. So it still is up in the air. If it continues to gain an audience, it could still get a publisher, or a different publisher could pick it up. But that's one that might remain.
I'm really curious though if there was anything that was like sold as a series that like.
Oh, there was one.
Look of it.
There was one that I only remember it because it caused a huge stink.
I know what you're talking about.
Because she published, it was like a Sleeping Beauty retelling or something.
I don't remember.
She published the first one. I bought it because I felt bad for her.
I think she published like 2. I think there were 2 maybe.
There was supposed to be 2 because she published the first one. She wanted to publish the second one, but the publishers told her no. So she did a Kickstarter for it. And then people on Twitter, or not people on Twitter, I don't know, book
It was
bloggers
people on
maybe,
Twitter. Yeah, it was Twitter.
told her that she wasn't allowed to ask for money for book 2.
People were upset about what she asked for and kind of like almost the tone she used in it. Like she was basically like, if you don't give me this money, I'm not writing the book.
They objected to the tone then. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
There's a book, Descendants of the Crane by Joan Key. I don't know if any of you have read. And I know she's had like issues with her publisher and like rights and everything, but I don't remember a lot about it. But I do remember that like the last part of the book was like an epilogue, but I think I remember her saying she added in because like they weren't going to give her another book.
That explains a lot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but unfortunately I have to bow out.
Okay.
I think, yeah, now publishers, whereas before they were like more inclined to just buy the whole series right up front, it is super unlikely that you're going to sell a series, maybe a duology up front.
Yeah.
And they're just much more likely to be like, well, just be ready to write more books if we want them from you. Maybe we'll let you.
I was gonna say when like I can't think of any books off the top of my head that like were supposed to be a series but then didn't. But I can think of a lot of books that suddenly
That
got
weren't
a
supposed to
series.
be. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about that. It was
Red Queen comes to mind. Book 2 was really.
Oh really?
Yeah,
Was
I
that one
read.
sold as a series?
I don't
I
know.
think it was.
Maybe, but book 2
I know a lot of
for me
people didn't
felt
like book 2. I liked book 2.
So. Felt like just a long gray stretch of nothing to me, like total filler. And then I liked the third.
That was an intended gray stretch of filler.
I think that was
very
less
political.
of,
I get it.
yeah, I don't think it was like a suddenly there's going to be a series, because the first one definitely felt like there was supposed to be a series, but I think it was, and this happened a lot, I think, in that time of like everything has to be a trilogy, and also everything has to be super high concept. Is people would have like a really high concept first book. Yeah, book 2 was like, so where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Next to another cool third book, you know?
Yeah.
I think the problem with a lot of trilogies is like the second book was like going from like super high concept, interesting first book and like big bang flash finale book, and like what do we put in the middle?
Filler in between.
Yeah, that's what I kind of think about 3 Dark Crowns. Like I wanted to.
That was supposed to be a duology.
It was a good duology,
and it became
like 5 or something. I don't even know. But what bothers me the most is that it's literally called like she didn't put the numbers in the right order, because it's like 3 Dark Crowns, I think 1 Dark Throne, and then like 4 something, and then, like,
something, and then 5 Dark
Thrones. Like 5 something. I'm like, that's not even 4. Like I was like so mad. So dumb.
Oh dear.
But yeah, the whole thing with selling series, because I've been seeing it again with the whole book shortage thing. I keep seeing this like pressure from authors of like, if you want more books in the series, you have to buy them, and like, but also pressure to like pre-order them. And like, I would rather start a series once the last book's out. But Twitter just tells me that I'm not allowed to do that, and I'm not supporting the author, but I don't even know if I like them yet. But we're seeing it again with like, if you want these books to be at the top of the shortage pile, you have to go order them now. And it's just a lot of pressure to put on readers instead of publishers that I do with TV shows too.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of like, well, this is also me, and I know that this isn't like pre-ordering is has like had some roller coaster. I usually don't pre-order things, but because it's the idea of like, oh, I'm spending money now and I don't get my thing for like 6 months and I need that instant serotonin. So I usually don't. But yeah, now it's this huge pressure of like, you have to, because it's might not be here if you don't. And I don't ever think pre-orders were really, I think pre-orders got really big in like the mid 2010s, because I don't remember being, 18 and being like, you have to pre-order the next Red Queen book or what have you.
I mean, different pre-orders were really big with the big series. Like, I mean, I went to midnight releases for Harry Potter and Twilight books.
Yeah.
So like, you went to your bookstore months in advance and paid them for the book, and they gave you a little
save this.
Yeah, I remember
that little ticket.
Well, they could look your name up in the computer, because I knew I would lose the ticket, so I checked it. It's funny, I don't quite understand, because even I, who loathe ebooks, if I really, really, really wanted a book and couldn't access it because of paper shortage, I would read the ebook. So I'm not really seeing the panic here. aside from, yes, it sucks to have a shortage of paperbacks for the publisher or whatever.
Yeah.
And for
I
the
would guess we are abnormal readers because we are not browse the bookstore, pick something up that we think someone would like readers.
Mhm.
We are
Right.
reading everything
Although
that makes eye contact with us readers.
I have been doing that recently, though. I went to Chapters the other day, and it was really fun because I was like, I'm not going to go in with any preconceived notions. I'm just going to grab something off the shelf that looks good. And I did that because I was like, it's been a long time. I think the last time I was like 13 or something that I did that. And then eventually I ran into a very helpful Chapters employee, and they're like, what are you looking for? What are you into? And I'm like, well, I really want a horror. And then we were discussing horror and in the adult horror section. And he was like showing me a couple different ones. It was really a fun experience. And I ended up finding a book I never would have picked up. And it was really, really good.
That's actually really cool because I feel like one
Yeah.
half of us worked at a bookstore at one time. Aaron, go first. What was the book?
No, I'm done.
What was the book?
Oh, sorry. We talked about this before, and it has a tree on it. Megan read it too, I think.
Oh, The Hollow Places.
Yes, thank you.
Kingfisher.
Yeah, the
That
Hollow
was a good
Places.
book.
But yeah, so
No,
when,
you weren't
back when we were all
There's a tree that's
super,
black.
Megan's
Megan
like, I know.
knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, being super aware of everything that was coming out and then going to a bookstore was not as much fun. I'm like, I've already read all of your blurbs.
Yeah.
So now it's a
Yeah,
better
true.
experience than it used to be.
Yeah.
It was stressful too, being like, oh, there's like 8 different books that just came out today, and I can only
Yeah.
afford to buy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit more overwhelming, and I definitely feel that all the time, especially on things now that like BookTube and Book Talk are like, this is going back to our consumerism point of like, there's so much now that, yeah, before, when I was 13 going to the store and being like, I've read every single one of these. They're like, oh, there's a new book out today. Like, I'm going to go get it. And now it's like everything releases all the damn time. And I don't have the money to buy all of them, and I don't have the time to read all of them. So it's
I definitely, over the course of the last like year and a half, I've like let go of the pressure I had on myself. Like I very much had this like, especially with YA, like all the new YA that's coming out, I need to like read all of the big ones. And now I'm like, no, I don't have to read them.
Yeah,
I
I
can
definitely
just
like
find a book that sounds interesting to me, right? Instead of like, it's like I had a whole long TBR and it was like, well, what's next? I got to read one of these. But now it's like, no, I can just browse and be like, oh, this sounds interesting. I'm going to read that.
Reading for pleasure? What?
yeah, wild.
Yeah. Either Rachel or Kelly, you mentioned this idea of like pre-order pressure being placed on readers and how that was maybe a pressure that would be better applied to publishing houses who are not doing enough to support their authors. And I feel like that's a really big part of some of the stuff we've been talking about lately is like what it's like trying to publish a book today. Like how hard is it to get published today? You've got publishing houses where previously you would get paid in 3 installments, and now they're paying authors in 4 installments, which means the paychecks are getting teeny tiny, and publishing is a lot today.
Yeah. Well, we could even talk about publishing houses because even in the last year or two, there's been
They're
so much more
shrinking.
pressure put on the publishing house. With like, there's Dear Publishers, which is that movement. There's, when Simon & Schuster had that kind of scandal with one of their imprints. So there's a lot more like focus on that, which I think is interesting.
Also, from 8 years till now, we've got the big 4 now, right? Like, it was the big 5 at least 8 years ago, right? Yeah.
Was there
Yeah.
big 6 at some point?
I think
Yes.
it was like
Oh,
right
it was a
around
big
then when it was 6 to 5. I think when
It
Random
was
House, I
6
think.
and then 5 and then now it's 4.
No, it's for, yeah.
Although they don't really, when you say things like big 4, they don't count stuff like Disney, which is a giant, and
Or Scholastic, which
or
is technically
Scholastic.
mid.
or
Mhm.
the romance one that I can never remember the name.
I think that's probably very
Harlequin.
similar to TV of like you have the major networks, but now the industry has changed so much that like Netflix is the major network. It's just not one of the ones that's on
Exactly.
TV.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well, I
know.
think you can kind of go as niche as you want to get, which is kind of cool. Whereas before it was like, which is also great because we would have those like worldwide where like everybody was reading the Hunger Games at the same time. But now if you don't like that, you can get so niche because there's like so many self-published authors, or there's so many like high concept, weird indie publishers that you can go to. So in that regard, it's great because you're just finding like super Like there's
the
books out that I'm like,
more-
I've been searching my whole life to find a book that's exactly
Yeah.
like this, and now
The
I'm
more
getting
you
it.
diversify, the better. What you don't want is like somebody
Absolutely.
to have a corner on a market. You know, if we just had the big
Mhm.
four and nothing else, you don't have enough competition. You know, you want to be able to say, well, if I can't publish with HarperCollins, I'll go to Random House or whatever. You know, like the more publishing houses, the more imprints you have, the more chances you have to sell your book, basically.
But then it sounds like the
Which is-
opposite issue to like we're talking about is readers were overwhelmed and there's too much. So
But at the same time, we have more options, and we, like Rachel said, like you can actually like find the thing you're looking for instead of like, well, this is the book everybody's reading, so I'll read it, even though it's not my thing. You know, that like you can really like find.
I think the problem mostly hits authors because it's like, how the heck do you stand out in a sea of new content, right? And with e-readers coming up, you know, even the smaller indie authors and self-published authors are also getting, you know, shouted out on TikTok and stuff, which is great. But now you have so much more competition, right? So I think, yeah, it becomes really difficult to stand out.
We've also definitely got a case of like, there's always been a lot of books published, and now there's a lot of like more different kinds of books published, which has been really great. But I do think today we still have in like the YA fantasy and like sci-fi sphere, the publishing houses trying to figure out what's going to be the next phenomenon. And like, I know I'm querying a fantasy. I know a lot of other people who are querying fantasy. Enough people that like one of us has got to have a good book on our hands. Like we can't all have written bad books. There's too many of us. And it's like impossible. This is, I think I've queried 5 books now. This is the worst querying has ever gone. And I am not the only person feeling that way.
It's funny because we were all having this conversation because for a while we were very discouraged. And querying is
you guys stop being discouraged.
yeah, I don't know if it's
Okay,
past tense, but
here's
okay.
the thing though. Okay, so like I just signed up for Publishers Marketplace, which can either be encouraging or discouraging or sometimes terrifying. And so I had been looking on it, scrolling through it, and kind of getting depressed. And then talking to Megan and Kyra, who are going through the query trenches right now, and we're all really doom and gloom because it's tough. The industry is tough. We were seeing a dip. With the pandemic, publishers are very slow to recover. They're still not taking chances. But, you know, I've been checking Publishers Marketplace, and YA is still selling. And YA is still also selling for significant deals, you know, and I'm seeing more YA every day. And you know what? Also, I'm seeing a lot of diverse authors selling, which is fantastic. But I was talking to, I'm part of a group of published authors on Facebook. We were having this discussion, which I find is very interesting, is that traditional publishing seems to be like, yes, let's publish lots of diversity and give them lots and lots of book deals, but let's make sure we give them small advances. And somebody said that to me and I went, really? And went over on Publishers Marketplace, scrolling through, and I'm like, you know what? That's true. Not a single significant deal, not a single like very good deal.
Lip service.
Yeah,
It's because the marketing support for they're giving those books too. So then they fail, and it's like, oh well,
right. And it was very interesting because I'm like, they could say now that they're giving these, you know, authors of color and queer authors a chance. Oh, we're doing it, but we're not paying out the money because we don't want to take that risk on something that we think might still not sell. And therefore, yeah, you're right. They're not going to put that same marketing push behind those authors. Yeah, it's very interesting that it is changing. We are getting more chances to publish, you know, not straight white characters, but only a little bit of a chance. You know, like you might not have that marketing behind you.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about this in the past, how generally it's probably a good thing not to be placing so much emphasis on like debut. This is their debut, their first book, you know. But by the same token, it's like raise your eyebrows at the fact that they started doing this when the doors were opening to more people.
Yeah, that's
I you know, seeing also people recently, and Erin, I think you also mentioned this, like, oh yeah, there's a lot of small deals, and then suddenly there's like a 6-figure deal, and you're like, what about more? Yeah, you're like, what? You're like, what about more?
I was looking at a 6-figure deal recently in YA. And
Yeah,
I was
like
whoa,
multiple 6-figure deals. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
well,
girl.
like why, maybe we should start paying people a little more equally,
Yeah.
And I do think publishing houses are also putting a lot of money into big names that they know will do well. Because
for sure. Yeah.
especially when you're querying or when you're on sub, you've got an agent, you're trying to sell another book. It's very easy to want to be like, well, who can I blame here? Is it agents because they're not requesting things? Well, no, agents are overworked. They're reading way more than they should have to read. They're doing a ton. So is it editors? But then you like start following editors and they're like, we're overworked. We're trying to sell things. And it just
that's very true.
keeps going.
Extremely
It's all bad.
They're so
it's
so
bad all the way down.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
It just screams into the void.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So like I think while we're at like a peak of publishing, we're also at like the messiest publishing's ever been. So it's
very messy. But I think it's really interesting because when I was looking for the horror stuff, the book that I found, I was really excited to see the image of the cover and the back blurb. It kind of looked, I don't know, it felt fresher than the other stuff on the shelf. Does that make sense? Like it was borderline something I might have found in YA. Like it's a little bit splashy. It was a little bit like commercial with that like a high concept. Whereas a lot of the rest of the horror felt very like, oh, it's like shelves and shelves of Stephen King and Stephen King's son, whatever his name, I don't remember him. And like, yeah, and then 50 other straight white male horror authors that all felt like really similar. Like all their book covers were really similar. And I like some of those books, I do, but they're what I see all the time repeatedly. So the new book I found caught my eye immediately, and it felt really fresh. And like I said, it felt like high concept, I guess. I'm not even sure how to describe it, but it felt like horror and adult in general is expanding a little bit into something that piques my interest, like YA did and does, if that makes sense. Like they're branching out a little bit, maybe because of YA, like because we're seeing more YA authors that are like, I want to try something different. And so we're still taking our sensibilities and our love of like high concept hooks and like engaging characters into these other, categories. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, even
That's
like the topic that we kind of skipped over a little earlier, which was like, YA's audience is 16 years old in theory, but a lot of people who grew up with the YA bang are now in their 20s and 30s. So they still read that. So then writers are like subconsciously writing for an older audience. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's a big theory.
Well, that's the upmarket YA, right? That's what we're
so like upper
YA.
Yeah, well then I'm like, well then I'm thinking that a lot of those adult books that are getting popular are popular because they read like YA, aka they have like more fast paces.
Yeah, the millennial voice, I guess.
Yeah, millennial voice, like faster pace, like quippy, that kind of thing. So like so that's why those ones are getting big.
Yeah.
And I'm just
like branching the rest of it.
Branching out from those like same authors that have like dominated the genre, like I said, because that's a lot of how I feel about adult romance, which I've started reading in the last like couple years, where like before I wouldn't have touched it at all because it seemed like it was just like the same people writing the same romances over and over again, and I wasn't interested. But now they're like starting to finally like put out like different voices and different kinds of stories, and it's like gotten me really interested as someone who used to only write YA or only read YA and would have like never read an adult romance, and now like it's like at least half of what I read is adult romance.
And I feel like adult is bleeding, has always bled a little bit into YA, but it feels like it's doing, like when you got cover titles like Wilder Girls and Sawkill Girls, and those are just like my personal taste as well, but they're like the upper, crossover ones, right? Like they felt borderline adult to me.
Yeah, and now new adults becoming a thing.
Sawkill Girls more, but I would love that if it actually, could we do fantasy, new adult fantasy? Because that.
See, I feel like it's just fantasy. Like it is adult fantasy. Yeah. Just got.
And that's the thing. I think that conversation about new adult has been interesting because like there was a little while where it was like, oh, this needs to be a thing, and then it like became just.
There was a hot minute where there was a shelf for it at my bookstore.
Yeah. Now, it's become. Oh my god! It's become like very split where it's become split where there's some people still who are like, oh, I really want that, and then people who are like, I'm finding that in adult fiction. I'm good. I don't
interesting.
I don't feel the need for it. I'm like, I'm good.
I feel like it's
just publish the books as adults.
Maybe it was picturing new adult as like older YA that still feels like shiny and exciting.
See, I think we've been having this conversation for so long that now most of us, Rachel
not
included, are not new adults anymore.
I think that's part of it for me too. Yeah, is that I'm like, while I love some books about people in their 20s, I'm not in my 20s anymore.
The thing though, because like adult is, like YA is like 6 years. Adult is like
the rest.
There's like so much in there. So I'm like, I want like something a little bit more streamlined. I don't want to read about like a 20-year-old mother and wanting to murder her husband. Like I want to read about like a 25-year-old struggling for the PhD.
There is plenty of that. Like, and that's the thing is like I'm definitely interested in those like 20s, 30s stories, but I just want them to be easier to find. I don't need them to be their own like section.
Category.
Or their own imprints. Personally, but people feel differently about it. So
it's true.
So we're like past an hour. So I wanted to really quickly talk about one topic on our list that we did not talk about yet. I know some of you wanted to talk about this, which was pitch wars, which we mentioned earlier.
I have so many feelings about pitch wars already so far over.
Megan and Erin were both like involved in pitch wars and stuff in the early on, like definitely 2013. It was like starting to get bigger. So like, and I definitely, even though I never participated, like I have like some feelings about like how pitch wars has changed over time. But we'll let you guys lead that since you both participated.
I was in 2014. What was your year, Megan?
I was 2016.
Okay. Yeah. So in 2014, none of the problems, I think, like, I didn't have any drama problems within my actual group of 2014 Pitch Wars people. Like, we have a private Facebook group where we all talk and, like, commiserate and stuff, and I love all of them. There hasn't been any issues with that. For me, the main problem in the 2014 kind of area was that the mentors and we just didn't get enough time. And then B, it just felt like a lot of hype. And I know that multiple 2014 Pitch Wars people that I know of got dropped because it really felt like a frenzy of agents requesting and then jumping on that hot item and then realizing later, like, oh, maybe I don't have room, or oh, maybe I don't have anyone I can sell this to. I just wanted to get, I just wanted to win against agent A, B, and C. And then for me personally, it was also just like a huge letdown because I think I got like 15 requests or something and then immediately got rejected overall by everyone across the board. And that was actually, that was Escape to Witch City.
Like, no, well, joke's on
it now.
Which you can buy now. It's on the bookshelves, so take that.
In general, my thoughts about Pitch Wars have always been that it seemed like way more hype than it was worth. Like I have never had any interest in like ever entering because I just like felt like it was like so, especially now, so many people entering and like how many? Yeah, there are people who got huge deals, but.
Yeah, the most valuable part of it, I think, looking back, is the mentoring process. And it is not emphasized enough. It's not long enough. And people are in it for the wrong reason, it feels like. The mentoring is the best part, in my opinion.
I would agree with that. I entered and got in. I entered 3 times and I got in 2016 and kind of had like what you would hope would happen from Pitch Wars. Like I got in. People were pretty nice. I had really amazing mentors. I don't personally think I would ever enter Pitch Wars again for young adult, but entering a new genre, I would consider entering Pitch Wars again because I thought the mentorship was so valuable. Yeah, it taught me so much about revisions. One of my mentors is now a literary agent and like they were so good. I had 2 mentors. They were a team. And it was just an amazing experience in that regard. No complaints about them. My year was when we started having pretty big drama blow-ups, I think. I want to say there was maybe some drama in 2015 as well, but my year was when it started getting big enough that once you have that many people in that high stakes of a situation, stuff boils over. And there were so many amazing people, but having that drama to deal with does detract. And if that's something that would really derail you, I don't think that Pitch Wars is going to be the best for you. I know they take measures and have taken more measures every single year to try and fix that. And yeah, there are a lot of amazing people that I still chat with occasionally from that year. So the community can be good. It really is kind of what you make it. Mentorship, amazing. I got an agent offer almost immediately. Like, I think I got like 8 requests, and the next day I had an agent offer, which seems like dream scenario, but it was set up at that point where we didn't get to query before sending out all of this work. And so I never got to query before I had an offer, and kind of had to make the choice, like, do I give up an author and just try querying? And like, no one's going to do that. And that has changed now. Pitch Wars does have a window now. So I believe you do get to start querying, but that was a big con the year that I was in it. And I do think still, even with all of that, there's so many people that you get less agents participating. And then when there are those like frenzies or whatever, it can make it really hard to choose whether you're going to enter the slush pile or not. And I tend to think that entering the slush pile is just, it's the safest option for many authors, the one that's like in your best interest the most.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like reached the end of its peak, Pitch Wars, and has like, I mean, maybe it's just I'm not paying as much attention to it, but I do feel like it like really peaked a couple years ago and is now kind of like starting to go down a little bit. But it definitely like, there was a point where people felt like, if I can't get into Pitch Wars, I can't get published. Like, this is the best way to find an agent or whatever, you know, which was like never true. Never like
they never claimed that was true either.
Absolutely not.
So many like writers felt that way, you know, that it created this really stressful environment for a lot of people entering. You know, there were people who were like, oh, I didn't make it in, or I didn't get any like agent offers, so like my book is trash, I am terrible, I'm never going to find an agent. When it's like, no, there's so many more agents out there, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
I would be really curious to hear what people's experiences were who have been in it more recently, because like it's been 5 years now since I was in Pitch Wars, and they've stretched out the window now. Erin and I were doing all those revisions in a 2-month period, and now it's a much longer window for revisions.
Yeah. Less high stress if you do it that way.
Which I imagine would mean less drama because people are less stressed.
and I feel like you get more quality content too if you have more time to spend on it, you know?
Like it depends on like obviously what the mentor is asking you to do, but like I get more time from my publisher oftentimes. Like 2 months is very, very short, especially if you're doing a major rewrite.
Yeah. And I still have a lot of fondness in my heart for Pitch Wars, even though, you know, things have not turned out the way maybe 2016 Megan thought they would. But it is something that I think it's good to know the good and the bad before you decide whether that is something that's going to be helpful.
Adjust your expectations pretty much.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, for me, like, I'm happy that I did it. At the time, it was crushing, getting a billion rejections at the same time. But like having access to this amazing group of people that, you know, you could kind of, they're all going through similar things or at different parts of the publishing process. But it's really valuable to have that. But yeah, just like adjust your expectations and don't put all your eggs in one basket, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like the biggest takeaway I've gotten from Pitch Wars was how much I learned to revise in that time period. It was really, really nice having people who knew what they were doing, being like, okay, so you've done this well, now try this.
And I think like since Pitch Wars, like there has also just been like a huge like number of pitch contests that have sprung up because of it. Like some of which are really great, some of which are like
less great,
cost money to enter and are not good. You know, like a wide range, but there's so much Twitter pitching going on now because of it. Remember mine had an interesting point. It said, in last month's Twitter pitches, I scanned the most recent 1,000 pitches and only found 2 that had been liked, but both were by indie publishing houses. And I'd be curious to like hear from like the agent's perspective what those pitch contests are like, because there's so many people using them now.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
I would not do it.
Because like every once in a while, like they'll be going on and I'll kind of like click on the hashtag and look at a few, and like, yeah, you'll see like a bunch that just like they're not pitched well, and you're like, oh man, you know. And so having to sift through all that would be hard.
Yeah, I almost feel like pitch contests, particularly PitMad, is the big one. I feel like that has changed a lot, where in the past it was a very like lots of agents are looking, there aren't as many people pitching, and now it is more often an opportunity for writers to bolster other writers.
Yeah.
I know like Kyra and I are querying together. We were feeling down and we were like, hey, you know what? Like, let's pitch our book because someone's going to comment on it and say that it's really good. And we want to hear someone say that it's really good. And yeah, so I do think that is a really amazing thing that has started happening, is people are just like really coming together to support other writers through that pitch contest, probably to the detriment of agents being able to sift through the content. Yeah.
We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. A lot of thoughts about the last 8 years.
Yeah, I thought we were going to be able to like touch on what comes next, and we just
didn't even get there.
Yeah, another chat.
And honestly, who knows?
Yeah.
Because 8 years ago, if you'd asked us, we'd have been like, oh yeah, there's going to be another big blockbuster series soon. And there hasn't been. So,
and look at us now. We're all in our houses and we haven't left in 18 months.
Anyway, so thank you everyone for watching for the last however many years you've been watching. And we will see you next week. Next week is
Game night.
Game night. Okay, it's some sort of special night. Game night next week. We're doing something witch themed. Yes. Because we've been doing witch stuff for this quarter. Maybe. We'll see.
It'll be a game. Have fun, please.
At night. Game night. All right, so please like and subscribe for more quality content. We will see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I forgot to click the button. Okay, bye. We love you guys.